about also Cap and Iron Man. We're starting to see their ideological differences unfold even here. What do you think they are fundamentally? Is it just that Tony wants control and Cap wants transparency?
I think on the surface it's that, but also, Stark grew up under the shadow of this kind of very close father-son relationship that Howard had with Steve. So I'm sure that it's driven by some unconscious motives. At the same time, they're two different, vastly different generations of moral psychology, and arguably Cap's is more righteous. But I think Tony's a realist, so that's always a fun dynamic to play.
This is why I think the next movie is going to be so effective, the Civil War, because I think I don't want to give too much away. This is very tricky territory you're pushing me into. But I think there's a flip-flop in the way we approach to things. Tony's always been this trailblazer, and he's always been his own man, and he bucks authority, and he dances to the beat of his own drum. And Cap comes from a world of order and organization and a hierarchy and structure. And I think after Cap 2, when S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of fell and Cap kind of realized you can't necessarily trust the people around you, or you can't trust the system, I think he now is kind of starting to follow his own heart and do his own thing. And without giving too much away, there becomes this kind of flip-flop in perspective.
There's a great moment at the end of this movie that we won't spoil, but involves the notion of them realizing the only way through all this is together.
Yeah.
And I love that, and it's one of my favorite moments in the film. And I do think Tony, if it wasn't for Tony, maybe none of this would have happened. And if it wasn't for Tony, the day probably would not have been saved. But his intentions were good.
Yeah.
And I think we carry that through in future films in a way that makes it very balanced in terms of who you might agree with in arguments to come.
It's an interesting take, too, because there's a part of me that feels like Cap is actually way more pro-transparency. And Tony is really about control. I don't know if that is the crux of it, or...
Yes, sort of. I mean, this is all another movie we're talking about now, but it is...
Even in this movie.
Well, that's why when we did our announcement laying out our next slate of films last October, I showed the scene of the two of them chopping wood together, because it's, again, another one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and I thought represent the undercurrent of their disagreements to come. So yes, a lot of the groundwork is being laid in this one.